Hey, good afternoon, Tim. It's another beautiful Friday, and here we are again.
Boy, isn't it? I really appreciate this time of year. It's a great time for reflection, and it's a great time to start planning the big ideas that we're going to be getting into the next year.
It is, and I just noticed that if today's topic is any indication, um, why did you pick ethics of all topics to kind of near our end of year?
Oh
That's
boy,
a tough topic. That's a big topic.
not only big and tough, it takes slow, methodical thought. And I decided to wrap up with this because, again, you know, doing things correctly in the right way is one of the charges of being a leader. Everybody else focuses on their skill set, and the leader oversees and ensures process and procedure is followed. And that has a lot to do with right or wrong. So I thought, it's good to start off with that, but it's also good to finish off with it because it is the bookends for good project management.
Oh, it definitely is. And when I saw the topic for today, I had to think for a little bit because, typically we think of ethics as kind of being that moral guidance or those moral principles that would govern our behavior, govern our conduct in the way we conduct our activities on a project. But when I really thought about this, I think it goes even deeper than that. It's more than I think just right or wrong. I think it's a code of behavior as well. And if I could illustrate with a quick story, several years ago, I was fairly a young project manager. I was doing a fairly good sized project. It was one of those where, and I've mentioned this on many of our broadcasts, that it was a fixed price. We bid fairly well. I thought we bid very well, and we ended up winning the job. Well, we got about 3 months into the job, and we realized that one of the task orders that we had been assigned, we had overbid by, and I'm not going to name the number, but it was a substantial overbid. And so I went to our senior manager at the time. He was a senior vice president. And I said, 2 weeks ago, you just gave us a huge conference, or all of us project managers, where you talked to us about how we should deal with our clients, how we always need to treat them ethically, favorably, fairly. I think he used the word fairly. And so I told him, I said, we have bid. It's a fixed price project. We don't owe the client anything. They accepted our bid. They signed the contract. But we seriously overbid this task order. And I think ethically, morally, just from a corporate standpoint, to live up to our ideals, I think we should offer to give some of that money back. He kind of gulped. And then he looked at me and he said, I did say that. And I do believe that. We're going to give them some money back. And,
Oh, wow.
and here's what's interesting. When I announced in the leadership, it was a steering committee meeting, when I announced the amount that we would be giving back because of the overbid situation, the head of the department, our client side, looked at me in utter amazement. He said, in all of my 40, 50 years of doing this work, no one has ever offered to give us money back on a fixed price project. And our status in his eyes went up remarkably. So I think from an ethics point of view, it's more than just right or wrong. I think it's taking care of those around us as well.
You know, um, Ethics runs a thread throughout our entire life. It's something that ties us to who we are, basically what we think of as me. It ties us to the way we look at the world and perceive it, the way we behave in the world, the way we interact with it. And it shapes, and you have to admit, our behavior and our opinions shape how the world interacts with us. So it is one of the foundational elements of how and why we experience the lives we do.
That is so true. So we, part of our podcast, the whole idea of coffee hour with Merv and Tim, is around project management. So taking those kind of concepts into mind, why do you think ethics is so important to us? Is, first of all, in our careers as project managers?
Well, I looked this up. I'm one of my favorite topics I like to talk about in my class is introducing the code of ethics to my students, because almost none of them have had somebody walking them through a code of ethics for it.
So
And I've asked them.
you're talking PMI's code of ethics
Yeah,
specifically.
PMI's code of ethics. In order to even take the exam, by submitting your application, you're obligating yourself to a certain code of ethics. And these have to do with a certain set of values. And if you want to in the future, we can talk about these values. But it goes back as far as 1982. It even predates the release of the PMP credential itself. And now it extended for all of them, okay? And there's some reasons it happened. Remember back then, we were still recovering from the effects of Watergate, a lot of kickbacks and payoffs in the economics and financial, and even other industries that we have going on. And there was a sense of corruption and despair on, the lack of proper human behavior. And what PMI wanted to do was say, you know what? Project managers who ascribe to this credential are committed and obligated to behaving at a better level of performance. And they actually went far and beyond what companies and corporations would ask. It's stringent and it's scary, but if you look at it and if you spend the time to ask why, each one of those components, each one of those standards is for a purpose. And that purpose is, number one, to make your life easier, to make your life a little more without the lack of obstacles. And second of all, it makes it easy for people to work together in a group. And you look at that and you say, that makes sense. I wonder why we don't do this in more aspects of our lives.
Well, and if you think about it from a project management perspective, and you've heard me harp on this a lot, we tend to, as project managers, especially starting out in our career, focus on the science or the process, the Gantt charts, the status reports, the QA reports, the UAT testing results, those sorts of things. We tend to focus on process. And you and I have talked a lot about the human factors that go into building good project relationships and our emotional quotient and that sort of thing. So those, process and human factors, important. Ethics somehow, and I tried to find things, even through some Google searches or through some of my textbooks here on project management, there's not a lot of discussion on the ethical aspects of what we do. And I think maybe we should be spending more time on looking exactly at the moral aspects, our conduct as project managers.
And there's a resurgence in this. If you follow YouTube channels, you see people like Simon Sinek and Marie Folio and Ryan Holiday. Oh boy, he's one of the contributors to the renaissance of Stoicism. And we see this uptick, and I don't know why. Part of it is, again, a rebound from what our society has experienced the last 20 to 30 years. I think we need to remind ourselves that, doing things in a quote unquote right manner. Now, lucky for Western civilization, we have about 6,000 years of documentation. What we have thought all along is right and wrong. There are little things that have changed, but there are big things that have not changed. And that's what's so interesting.
You kind of make me smile because I know that you tend to get more historical and philosophical, a lot of these topics, and I am much less read than you are. But I did do some reading this week, and I came across something. There was a king back in the Medo-Persian, you're going to love this, Tim, in the Medo-Persian era who enacted a law. And when he realized he made a mistake when he enacted the law, he realized it could not be changed according to the law of the Medes and Persians. So there was a law that said you couldn't change your law.
Right.
And what I found was ethically, I think that was put in place because the kings that preceded him, or the monarchs that preceded him, did whatever they wanted to do. They killed who they wanted to, they punished who they wanted to, they rewarded who they wanted to. And somehow, even back then, whatever that was, 2,500, 3,000 years ago, even back then, people understood there needed to be something ethical in the way we conduct ourselves. He was,
Yes.
I think it was Darius the Mede. He was much more than a project manager. He was a king manager. So even he
Right.
was restricted.
Well, and it's funny. We talk about these things that are so big picture, but we can pull it into a project too. Again, we've all had deliverables and projects that were successful, but they were also failures.
Yeah.
They didn't meet the objective. We did everything right with the requirements, but the results and the purpose of the work were forgotten along the way. And so this is where ethics and values can actually help us understand this. And one of the most powerful tools we can use as a manager and leader is pumping the brakes and saying, let's think about this. Let's think about the consequences and the unintended outcomes of this action and decision.
Oh, absolutely. And from a project management point of view, when we're talking about ethics, I think I can almost distill it down to a series of how do I develop trust, not just with my peers and my team, but also with my clients? How do I instill the art, the science, the effect of responsibility within my team so that what they say they do, what they promise they conduct, what they fulfill? And those sorts of things are the absolute bedrock. I think what we establish our ability to manage well based on the trust and the responsibility and the fairness of the way we conduct ourselves. Because if we're all kind of acting that way, then the project itself will go much better, much smoother.
What's funny is when we were teaching Intro to Project Management and PMP exam preparation in 2020, excuse me, we were teaching the fundamentals and the framework and the foundation. This is a project, this is a phase, this is how things fit together, and these are the big connectors, right? In 2021, we're starting off with, this is the team, this is the leader, here's how you treat people, here's responsibility, and here's accountability, which is really fascinating. And the transition from the 6th edition to the 7th edition says we're turning our focus not away from process, but we're turning a bright light on principles and behavior, not just process.
Well, yeah, and if you really think about it, if people are operating from the same ethical boundaries, you end up diminishing risk because you know how the other people will respond in certain situation. You end up actually producing more successful results. You end up increasing trust among your team. And if my team trusts me, it's not that they take every single word that I say as project manager verbatim, that they shouldn't be challenging. But if they trust me to have their best interest, the project's best interest, more importantly, the client's best interest at heart, then how can you possibly go wrong? You all strive, you work hard, and you try to get to that point because you're all operating from the same moral fiber.
So here's a good question for you.
Okay.
When did you first become aware of ethics and ethical issues?
I think it was instilled in me as a child. I'm not sure that there was a cognizant awareness, except that if I wasn't acting ethically or behaving properly, then the seat of my pants learned that very quickly that you needed to. But I do remember distinctly when I was much younger, going into a restaurant or a store, or maybe it was a coffee shop or something, but offering, giving the person a $20 bill getting my product and getting back change and realizing that the person had given me way too much change. And I took it and I offered it back to her, the clerk, and she looked at me kind of like, what, that's too much of a tip. I said, no, I've already tipped you. This is what you gave me that was too much. The look on her face to say that someone would take the time to give back something to her where she had made a mistake, to me, it was just something that was built into me that I had to ethically respond. To her, it meant if she couldn't make up the money, it had to come out of her tip jar, out of her pocket. Just to see that look on her face made it even more important for me to conduct myself that way through other situations as I went through life and as I went through my career.
So
How about yourself?
Well, I want to say something, and then I'll give you a really good counterpoint.
Sure.
So, number one, your sense of integrity. You were taught something and you were able to repeat it, but you were able to do it. Your actions and your words are in alignment. That's called integrity. When you have that, you create trust. Mm-hmm. And you actually demonstrated trust, and you experienced the response that you get from demonstrating trust. You were very lucky to have that at a very early age, okay? And this is why, as leaders, we need that sense of integrity, being of one mind and one word, right? Now, one of my first jobs, actually, it was about my third job, I think. Yeah, it was my third job. Here I was doing an IT audit of an organization. It was about October, November, right? And at that time, they were using VisiCalc to put together the business plans. And the organization manager said, Tim, I want to show you a trick. And he said, here's all the formulas behind the VisiCalc template, okay? And I can manipulate these formulas and I can get the numbers I need to actually meet my business for the next year. Isn't that cool? And I'm saying to myself, well, first of all, this guy's smart. Second of all, I'm saying that sort of defeats the purpose of the exercise of the VisiCalc itself. And I was thinking, that's wrong. And I was thinking, these guys are smart and also wrong. And that was a huge paradigm shift for me. That blew me away.
Yeah, they should. The guys you look up to or the gals you look up to should be the people who are most trustworthy, most ethical.
They have to demonstrate it because nobody under them are going to achieve to that level. They have the boundary. They should have the highest level of integrity.
Yeah, well, and that's exactly right. Because if you're talking, we're going to be talking here shortly. I noticed that you threw a question out to me in preparation about group ethics versus individual. So I think we'll be talking a little bit about that. But it's that leadership aspect. And you mentioned earlier the PMI Code of Ethics.
Uh-huh.
And it's interesting, but see if you, do you know this name, Michael Obrachta?
I don't, that doesn't.
Apparently he was, and I'm sorry if Michael's listening to this, I apologize for butchering his name, but he was the PMI Ethics Member Advisory Chair. PMI Ethics Member Advisory Chair. And one of the things he said, which exactly I think fits to what you and I are talking about right now, is that ethics leads to trust, trust leads to leadership, leadership in turn leads to project success. So it all comes back down to that foundation that we've been talking about: ethics, trust, building upon that whole foundation.
Yeah.
Because once you've got that, everything else can move from there.
Now, the problem is, and this is where we need to really spend more time thinking about ethics, because it's not just building trust. There's another variable that gets thrown in the mix. Number one, people make mistakes.
They do.
I
do.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm part of that group too. Second of all, people misbehave. We're lazy, but there are good reasons for us to be lazy. We find shortcuts, but there are good reasons to find shortcuts. But the problem is we can actually think, it actually gives us a short-term reward. And we're very bad at evaluating and estimating rewards that are further out in the future. And we want immediate rewards right now.
Yeah.
So as a leader and even as a contributor to a team or a group, I have to understand that, a lot of ethics and morals is telling yourself no. And that's not easy to do.
No, and when you said also misbehaving, I mean, I've been in situations where a person had a domestic altercation. I don't know, I shouldn't say that, but a dispute that morning with their spouse or with their children, and they come back and they behave badly towards the other staff, and sometimes almost in an unethical manner. And it has nothing to, you look at that person saying, that's not in your character. What's going on here? And then you realize it stems back to something that has nothing to do with the project or with you. It happened as a result of something in their life that is now coming out in a different pattern. So you're right. There's so many variables in this whole.
And we need to actually focus more on this in ethics and leadership, because there is another whole show that we could do on the connection between ethics as an idea and an ideal, and ethics as in taking action. It's a great philosophy, and it's a great exercise after dessert, but without taking it into action. And that's what's hard about ethics and morals as a project manager. You're the person who actually has to step up. and this is the problem.
I remember taking ethics as part of a law class when I did my MBA. And even back then, it seemed like I never thought of it as a project manager. I was an IT specialist when I took my MBA. I never thought of that ethics class. It was something for me to get a grade on so I could get my MBA. But I never thought of taking the aspects of that, which were kind of tuned towards the law profession, and saying, wait a minute, this also fits with what I do on a day-to-day basis. And so, yeah, there's a lot of aspects of what we do in life, what we learn in life, that we need to be able to bring home into our careers and be able to deliver those in the way we conduct ourselves.
This is beautiful. That's exactly right. It is a holistic set of values. It can't be separated in your life, because that is not integrity.
That's
when
true.
It comes to value, you have to have one set of values.
Okay, so let me throw something at you. So we're talking largely, we've been talking as project managers, as individuals, and if we sort of put a definition of around ethics being a discipline that is concerned with our moral judgments, the goodness or badness of our behavior, the goodness or badness of our decisions, those sorts of things. So as an individual, now I'm leading a team, now I'm part of a group, now I'm part of an organization. How is my individual set of ethics the same or different than that of my group? Any thoughts?
Yes, and this is where we get into trouble. And it's not just us, okay? It's not just project managers. It's not just Western civilization. It's all of humanity, okay? So let's step back. We have morals and values, and we also have needs, right? Now, Maslow says we have physiological needs, right? And if I cannot feed myself, my body will perish. Is it all right for me to steal food if I'm starving to death? That is an ethical dilemma, right? Now, let's take my family into account. My family is starving to death. Is it all right for me to steal food from my family? I know this doesn't seem like it pertains to project management and business, but do you see the dilemma I'm pointing out?
Well, I do, but I was also wondering if you were rewriting Les Miserables right here in front of us.
Let's actually, Les Miserables is a cautionary tale that
Yeah.
talks exactly about what we're talking about.
Yes,
Now,
exactly.
if you go back to our projects, when you start talking about a group, you're talking about fairness to each and every one. And it's very easy for me to say to one individual, I understand the context and I'm willing to let it slip. But the problem is, from a group level, are you willing to have the entire group slip? And how do you actually establish these values? And how do you maintain these values? And so the individual values, I have really strict values for myself. And I have the understanding that others wish to aspire in when they're their best selves. I have an understanding that they're aspiring to similar values, right? But when I get into a group, how do I set that boundary where it says, here's the group, here's the individual, and in order to be fair and equitable, I need to treat each buddy the same, but at the same time, I understand that people make mistakes. I understand that people are at different parts of their lives. This is really confounding.
Well, it's confounding. And then I think there's one part that you may have actually missed in that description, and that is that you and I may be on the same team, part of the same group, and have totally different levels of ethics and morals.
Yeah. Oh, we struggled with this when I was in consulting. We had about a third of our staff, 300 people, were Eastern Indian, and almost to a person, they were vegetarian. What's right or wrong? And from a group level, we can all say it's all right. That's great. And you have wonderful vegetarian food.
Yeah.
And at the same time, it's like I make a hotel reservation and I go, oh, I didn't choose the restaurant that, all this poor guy can eat is salad. And this is tough.
Yeah. Well, and if you think about it, and I've thought about this a lot. I've thought about this a lot. I've kind of described what we as individuals tend to do. And for me, I'm like you, I have a strong moral code for myself in terms of how I will act in certain situations, how I conduct my behavior, conduct my activities. But what I've learned, I think over time, maybe this comes with age and experience, but that in groups, it's the dynamics of the group that kind of holds the organization together, the project together, whatever we're talking about. But by and large, groups in and of themselves don't make ethical decisions. And so therefore, if it's the group that's not making the ethical decision, it really does come to leadership to lead in those ethical decisions. Am I making a little bit of sense here?
You're making great sense.
So
well,
I think
go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
So what you're saying is actually the group doesn't have morals and standards or morals and ethics, but the group has culture, which are a set of unwritten rules that bound the group. And the group has politics, which are the power and the rank and the explicit controls that govern and discipline the group, and those together define the group. What's important, and we talk about this in project management, is at the earliest time possible, the team should get together and decide what's right or wrong for working as a group. And the project manager or the leader ensures that that team charter includes things that are normal behavior for an individual, that are accepted behavior for the organization and business.
Well, exactly, because when I made that statement, and then when you also added to that in terms of groups being the dynamic but not making the moral or ethical decisions, suppose you end up in a situation where you have a highly unethical leader. Now, that highly unethical leader can influence the group in such a way that the entire group acts unethically, except for those one or two people with a high moral standard and a lot of bravery that are willing to get up out of their chairs and walk out, even at the expense of losing their position. And so you end up with situations where I think that's the part that we as leaders have that huge responsibility, because a lot of times the group, well, typically the group will follow our lead, and we can take them this way or we can take them this way.
See, and this is what gets scary about this, okay? This is, and this, I counsel maybe 2 or 3 project managers a year who are in such ethical dilemmas that they're either at risk or they've lost their job because of taking such a stand. The Code of Ethics, PMI's Code of Ethics, asks us to be whistleblowers, and it also asks us to protect whistleblowers, which is a scary thought. Our society does not treat whistleblowers well. Even since the 1960s and 70s, as long as I've been alive, I've observed in newspapers and political cycles, basically people who stand up and say, there's something fishy going on and I have to expose it. Those people are taking a huge risk.
They are. And, the other part of where I was coming with this whole group dynamics and stuff is that you and I have been in IT for many years. We have seen aspects of technology, aspects of management theory, many things change dramatically over those 30 or 40 years. I mean, I'm just looking at, let's say AI as an example, artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence has an incredible ability to do a lot of good. But I think from what I'm seeing and reading, it can have an incredible ability to also do harm.
I was listening to YouTube with Fei Lin, who's a leading expert in AI and AI research. And she said, it is a requirement that our AI research include economists, philosophers, attorneys, all aspects of our society to understand exactly what we're doing by handing over some of the decisions we make to systems and processes. It is a requirement. And again, you and I have lived through so much, like the early 1980s with the change in business theory, right? The theory of shareholder supremacy, where the investor, because they have the risk reward, should be the major decision maker in a corporation. And it actually created an overheating of industry and created incredible short-term gains at the cost of individual worker fulfillment and engagement. And it isolated and it alienated a lot of workers and employees.
And sometimes it came at the cost of livelihood. I mean, that was the other side of that is, the bottom line was everything. And so sometimes that meant cutting and cutting inappropriately.
Yeah.
Where I was going with the ethics or with the artificial intelligence as an example, not as a rule. But if I'm a project manager looking at that, I can sort of fall into a situation where, hey, I just used the technology. It wasn't me that was unethical. I just used the technology.
Let me give you an example of that. We were implementing a new data center strategy with one of our clients, and we'd go out to lunch or dinner with various executives and various stakeholders. And one day the CIO stopped 3 of us in the hallway, and she said, "Thank you guys. Because of what we talked about the other night, it seems that I can reduce my headcount by 33% over the next 2 years in IT." And I'm thinking to myself, I have just participated in giving 200 people pink slips.
So now is that a dilemma of conscience because of you feeling badly for those people? Or that's one of those things where I'm not sure, and I don't know your situation or what your contract required of you. I'm not sure that would be such an ethical dilemma. It's probably one that touched your heart as opposed to your contract
Yeah,
more.
it was a personal dilemma. It
Yeah,
was
yeah,
personal. It wasn't professional. I did exactly what my role was supposed to do, was give
yeah,
advice. At the same time, I felt personally responsible and accountable
yeah.
for the physical handing over of 200 pink slips. And this is where morals and ethics really become difficult. This is what gives leaders gray hairs right here.
Yeah, but let me offer you something else, Tim. I think had you known that was going to be the result of you taking that job, you probably wouldn't have taken that job.
Right. You're right.
So, because it was an it was an unknown consequence of your consulting process that led to a conclusion that you never dreamed of. It wasn't that you were hired to do that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, that was tough.
yeah,
And this is the world we live in.
it is.
And again, I think the best response to this is the Stoic response. Marcus Aurelius said it. You know, do things that are within your control, and don't worry about things that are outside of your control because you can't really influence them.
Right.
So all you can do is control the actions, perceptions, opinions, and behavior that you generate. If you do that, you're probably doing more than what most of us are doing.
That's right. So putting that example aside, which I think I'm going to let you off the hook. I don't think that was an ethical situation.
Okay.
But do you have an example of say a scary ethical challenge that you've happened to be part of or that you initiated?
Many times, like I said, with the VisiCalc and as a consultant, realizing the impact of my words. And there are a couple that come to mind that I thought were ethical issues and didn't turn out to be. Like working in South America, I was working with a client there, and he said, I have a cousin, and he can actually process these contracts to the federal government. At that time, in that trade block, that you had to do this, and if for an extra sum of money, and it was not huge, but it wasn't like pennies, I'll go ahead and have him push this through the government. What am I going to do? What's right or wrong? And the problem is, you study this in business school, and this gets really difficult because this type of action may be considered coercion in the United States, but in other parts of the world, it's just the way of doing business.
Yeah.
But what we found out, I lucked out. Okay, I just lucked out. And I called the attorney who was overseeing my projects. And I said, I have this situation. And and he said, where? South? No, you're really doing work in South America? I said, sure, I'm looking at contracts. He said, we've been looking for contacts there, and we've been looking for such a person who is in the federal government. They have 2 people in each country who are designated authorities. And you've not just helped me on this project, but you've helped me on a lot of our other work. So I was thinking I was giving a real big problem, and I solved so many problems for my attorney. So making this visible and raising an issue I was uncomfortable with was exactly the best thing I could have done.
Well, right. You didn't act on it and then raise it. You raised it before you acted on it. So that is how we should be dealing with ethical situations.
Exactly. Boy, I was sleepless for about 48 hours on that one. What am I going to do? I
can't say that in my experience I've had a lot. I do remember, I remember one where I was kind of, what would you say, kind of an arm's length away from it, where I did notice a situation where we had a gentleman and a secretary and a cell phone and a brand new car that were part of the project. And he didn't do much on part of the project, but apparently he was part of the team that helped us get the job. I learned that only after the fact. So I don't know if it was ethical or unethical, but it was a situation that happened. But I do have a situation where I can't get into the details, but I did end up supporting a whistleblower. You mentioned whistleblowers earlier. I ended up supporting a whistleblower, and probably ended up keeping him from losing his job had he stood alone. But because I had also witnessed secondhand, had learned of the same situation, I was able to support that person. And because of my position as project manager, I was considered more credible to be able to recount the facts. So fortunately, in that situation, his information and what I had learned secondhand were consistent, and therefore the people who had enacted the unethical situation ended up being dealt with. But that was probably the closest I came, and it's the one that I personally was involved in.
And you know what? You followed exactly the advice of the Code of Ethics, which is have your facts in place before you raise the ethical issue.
Oh, that is so true. That is so true.
Yeah.
In fact, I once told the IT manager of one of my client sites when he questioned me on something I had said in the meeting, and I just looked at him and said, "You can count on this. If I say something in a meeting or if I put it in an email, I have done my fact checking before I open my mouth or open my laptop. That's just the way I conduct myself as a project manager."
You have to be that way. You have to be that way.
So how do you think we can create an environment then as project managers? How do you think we can create that environment where people feel like right and wrong are being handled correctly or well?
Boy, start early and influence often. Create that expectation. Get that team charter in place and make sure that it never gathers dust. You know, get people so they're complaining that you're talking about the team charter too much. That means that they're starting to memorize the details, which is great. How about you?
Well, I think, we had that discussion earlier about individual ethics versus group ethics. I think as leaders, it is up to us, not just to learn the arts and charts of project management, but to truly understand communication, to truly understand good judgment, to truly paint that vision, much like you were saying in the charter, to develop an enthusiasm or an energy about ourselves, such that when those things combine within the way we conduct ourselves, people will naturally want to follow that. And then lead by example. Don't do anything ever that would call your actions into question.
Right. Make it easy and make it fun and make it very common sense to do things in the right manner.
Yeah.
Make it difficult and make it invisible and make it complex. This is James Clear in Atomic Habits. It's like creating the flow in a store. It's really funny. Some stores you walk in and it's easy to get around. Other stores are designed really complicated, and you can actually design your project in these ways too. And when you talk about human-centered design, if you understand human behavior, and this is where emotional intelligence comes in. You can, basically rely on how people react, how people behave, and how people think. And you can make it relatively easy for people to join as a team, use the team dynamics as peer pressure, and create that context that says we are, quote unquote, the team, that allows you to actually create that discipline boundary where no amount of lecturing would do it.
Yeah, and you said something quite a ways back in this podcast as well, and it dealt with fairness. How do I treat each of my team members fairly or equitably, or however you put it? And I was thinking when you were saying that, I've had the privilege of being a father to more than one child, so therefore I had the ability to compare. I treated my children fairly, and I think I treated them equitably, but I didn't treat them exactly the same.
Yes.
Because everyone has different behaviors, different ways of looking at the world, different experiences. And so I think it's the same thing with our teams. is we can be fair, we can be equitable, but we don't have to treat everyone exactly the same.
So this is where I played with rewards and recognition. Okay. I made the rewards pretty standard. You know, if you achieve something, ta-da, you get a piece of chocolate, right? Recognition, I shaped for the individual.
Yeah.
And it actually counterbalanced really well.
You know, I have friends who have, and I don't understand this so much, but I have friends who have become expert in, I'm going to say this wrong probably, neuro-linguistic programming, NLP.
NLP.
And what they've shared with me, and I've observed this since then in situations, that NLP can be used incredibly effectively. It can also be used in a way to manipulate. You know, we talked before about changing technology like AI, changing management behaviors as well. And some people purposely learn NLP for the purpose of working with teams. But if they use those sorts of techniques in a nefarious way or in a manipulative way, you can get the opposite. So then you end up being unethically behaving in those situations.
And that's the problem. The tools are the same.
Yeah.
The purpose and the reasoning behind it are what make it. It's sort of like a hammer. A hammer can break a window or it can put a nail in. It's the hand behind the hammer. It's the behavior and actions that shape the wrong or right. Now, this is where it gets really interesting, because if you go back to a guy by the name of Cicero, was one of the greatest orators, senators, you know, back, he went up against Julius Caesar, okay? And he wrote a book on how to persuade. He was an attorney too. And he said, and when you take these classes in debate, they say this too: the same tools that you use to persuade, you can also use to manipulate and to coerce. And so we have to be very careful, and we have to, as individuals, understand when we're persuading and when we're coercing.
So much. And project managers who are on the cusp of getting behind in a project or losing some of that precious profit margins, they still have to act the same way ethically at all times and figure out a way out of those situations without resorting to these manipulative or coercive tactics.
Yeah, being a human being is important.
You know, we've gone through a couple of years now, almost a couple of years now, of this whole pandemic situation, which I think has led to some sort of societal rebellion or upheaval or whatever you want to call it. Do you think, as a result of what we're experiencing or have experienced, that people are seeing a greater need for ethics now? What do you think?
Okay, so we look at the dawn of the code of ethics with PMI. And PMI explicitly said, because of this unethical behavior in the public arena, PMI put this together. I think what it does, these hard times of social and economic and political unrest, I think these times actually force us to reevaluate the role of ethics and the impact of ethics versus the impact of unethical behavior. I think it raises our awareness. I think it's always there, but I think this actually brings it to the value of ethical versus non-ethical behavior into the public conversation.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think as project managers, as a result of that, the onus is even greater on us as we lead our teams to make sure that we don't resort to that. You know, I asked you, I think, in terms of, do we think more people see a need for ethics? I could have turned that around and said, do you think as a result of our societal unrest these days that more people see opportunity to bypass ethics?
Oh boy.
I think both situations, I think, exist.
The problem is, so much of what we call ethics and ethical behavior is founded on human nature. And this is my hope. Aristotle, through all the others, said human nature if left alone, is basically good. Okay, and there's proof of that. Okay, you go to philosophy and logic classes, and they prove this out. And when you get into unethical behavior that works against human nature, both individual human nature and human nature as a group, it confounds it. It makes it complicated, difficult, and it makes us feel yucky. Okay. Yeah, there's actually a
That's a
scientific term for yucky, but I don't remember what it is. But the thing is, it doesn't work. It really doesn't work. And so the problem is, when we're young, we're learning the technical and the individual activities of leading and managing, like schedule, scope, and cost, and risk and quality.
right.
And the problem is, we don't have time for these human things. It's only when we start learning about this finesse we call relationships and trust and self-awareness and all of these other things that we actually can sit back. And this is where Aristotle said that philosophy is only good for people with silver hair. And I don't know that I agree with that, but I can see the logic in how he came to it.
I could do a whole show in terms of the contrarian approach to, or what you just talked about people being, because I've raised children, and it is I believe that people are basically not good, and unless corrected in an early time, they could go off the deep end in terms of their bad behavior. But that's for an entire show that has nothing to do with project management. But here, so I was thinking of this example. Part of what we've just gone through and still are going through, there's a lot of remote work still happening, people in their homes. Now, people with a highly ethical compass, and I'm talking about the worker bees now, people with a highly ethical compass will try to prove to their management that they are more effective than they ever were in the office, having not required the commute, having not required a lot of those things, being able to deal with personal items right there and still get back to work. I think ethical people will prove that remote working is a boon to the corporation. Those people who are less than ethical, or perhaps looking for ways to game the system, I think they're the kind of people who will turn their cameras off, who will multitask on personal items and do the odd grunt every once in a while. And knowing if they have a particularly perhaps a weaker leader, knowing what they can get away with. And I think people in those situations have learned, some people, not all, I'm not making a generalization, but have learned how to game the system so that they get paid much more, or get paid the same for not having to go into the office, but not also doing the amount of work that's expected of them. Just my thought.
That's a struggle. That's a struggle. Yes. And we're actually going through that thought exercise right now as a society. 70 to 72%. I was reading up on a couple fairly unbiased reports. 70 to 72% of corporations are making moves to formally bring people inside the company. And this is in the face of so many workers leaving certain jobs and also refusing to come back to work, and to the point of quitting instead of having to work. It's a preference thing. Now, there's another dynamic going on. There is a human personal need to associate with other people. It's called engagement.
Right.
And it's not just engaging in people, it's engaging in the work that people work with. And this was, there were a series of Gallup polls that were performed, and they're still performed, and they're going to be in the future, that say, number one, we're disengaged as a body of employees. This is international, but again, for the U.S., we're disengaged. We're not committed to our work. We don't trust our work. We don't trust our companies. And at the same time, the results of that poll say 70% of the engagement of workers can be influenced by the manager.
Oh, yeah.
I have the ability to increase the engagement of my workers, and they cite, you do this, 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 and this, and your workers will be engaged. So the checklist people are happy, and the humanistic leaders are happy as well. So there is a way to do it well, but the problem is it takes the leader and manager being involved and not just telling people to get work done.
Well, exactly. And again, using my simplistic examples, those who really want to perform at home and those who want to get away with something at home, given a strong, now this is an additional challenge for a manager who didn't have that challenge when everyone was in the office and you could walk by their cubicle or their office. But exactly what you're saying, you engage people, even those who want to say cut corners. If you engage them in a way that says, wait a minute, I'm counting on you. You are doing a good job for us. You will continue to do a good job for us. You can turn that attitude around.
So
and that's where the whole ethical aspect of not just the leadership in terms of making sure every one of their staff is engaged, but also in terms of those people who would be prone to cutting corners then suddenly turn around as well.
So this requires a reset in leadership, okay? And it's no less than understanding the reset required to incorporate Agile. In fact, they're very, very similar, if not identical. Number one, a set of key performance indicators that measure engagement and participation, and also a set of key performance indicators that measure group cohesion. Not just the work getting done, but the cohesiveness of the group and the participation of the individual in that. And I have yet to actually put my thoughts around what these indicators would look like.
There's something for a experienced project manager to sink their teeth into, right?
Yeah, so here's the other side of that as we're wrapping up. What would you tell a new project manager getting into this about ethics and morals, and what guidance would you give them?
Well, I think first of all, understand your own values, understand where you're coming from. But secondly, you get into, and this will happen to every new project manager, you're going to get into a situation that you don't quite know how to handle, not because you're not capable of handling it, but because you haven't been experienced in handling these sorts of things. So we've talked many times on this podcast in past shows about mentorship, about getting advice from your senior leadership, and just don't go it alone. And I think you said earlier, Tim, something about putting the brakes on. When you get into these situations, put the brakes on. No hasty decisions. Contemplate, ask for advice, and then make your decision.
Yes. I am in total alignment with you here. And also confrontation and conflict management and a lot of things that are around being a leader, and also include ethical dilemmas. Don't be afraid to talk about them. And the more comfortable you are as a leader talking about them, the more comfortable your group will be in raising them and talking about them too. And even though they may be scary, it's just like talking to your children. There's a way to approach these things that it's not just scary, but it's necessary to talk about them. So when we do get in those situations, it's a calm, rational discussion instead of everybody's trying to skirt the issue.
Well, and that's the important thing. Confrontation and conflict are not necessarily negative unless you as a leader make them that way.
Yes.
Confrontation can be very positive. Someone may be brought up to understand that's part of their behavior or their conduct is not good for the group. They weren't even aware of it. So you bring it up in a gentle way, a encouraging way, perhaps, but not one that's accusatory, finger in the face kind of thing. and people will come alongside that. So confrontation, conflict management, important aspects, and not have to be negative.
Yes, yes, indeed.
So I think ethically, we should probably stop the podcast at this point, because we promised an hour, and I think we're pretty close to that hour.
We're spot on. We're
We're
spot
spot
on.
on. There you go.
So where can we find you right now, Merv?
I'm not as active as I want to be, but LinkedIn, definitely, when something comes my way, I respond. So LinkedIn, Merv Jersak, or People First Project Management on LinkedIn.
Like you, I'm just starting to clean up the backlog of messages and requests and that kind of thing. So if you are attempting to talk with me, be patient. I will get with you. I really appreciate people reaching out. And if you give questions based on my workload and my ability, I love to think about the things you guys are thinking about. It really does inspire me to have such curious project managers out there.
Oh, absolutely. And can we promise, Tim, that the last show or two of our first year, that will go a little easier than such a hefty subject as ethics?
Yeah, I think we deserve it. We deserve it, and our audience deserves it.
Maybe next time we'll have some milk and cookies, and we can talk about the end of year ideas for project management.
That would be fun.
So until next Friday, we'll see you then.
Sounds good. Thanks, everyone.